Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Thank you for coming out in the snow.
We have new technology going.
So we'll each have our own microphones, hopefully with no feedback. But yes, we appreciate you being here on this beautiful snowy morning. Okay, so we'll start as we always do with our opening prayer. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. O Lord Jesus Christ, open the eyes of my heart, that I may hear your word, and understand and do your will, for I am a sojourner upon the earth. Hide not your commandments from me, but open my eyes, that I may perceive the wonders of your law. Speak unto me the hidden and secret things of your wisdom. On you do I set my hope, O my God, that you shall enlighten my mind and understanding with the light of your knowledge, not only to cherish those things which are written, but to do them. For you are the enlightenment of those who lie in darkness, and from you comes every good deed and every gift. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
I try to put a little picture just to give us a kind of a connection to Mark, and this time there's these papyrus. This is actually one side and then a flip side, and this is the earliest physical text of Mark from the 2nd century, so it's many decades after what we would expect Mark to have been written, but this is the oldest fragmentary piece of it. And it's amazing to me that with just that little bit right there, you have enough words that you can kind of zero in on what the text is. I think it was found in a tomb in Egypt or something like that. But you get a little tiny fragment, and then you can match up some of those words, and it turns
with
out
other fragments.
With the Greek text of Mark, and you can say, okay, this is from the first chapter of Mark. So, it was circulating, it was passed around, and then this takes us into the 100s AD somewhere is when this comes from.
Yeah. All right, so last time we were talking about Mark 6, and as you remember, we talked about that terrible dinner party with the beheading of John the Baptist at that dinner party, and we were contrasting all the ugliness of that place, thinking about the narrative and how we kind of cut out of the story of Jesus and went into this other story, kind of backtracking as to what happened with John the Baptist. And then we were contrasting and looking at that horrible feast with this orderly, beautiful feast of the feeding of the 5,000. So I hope you took that with you last week, the beauty of the narrative itself, the different ways of these two things being put together as a comparison of good and evil, darkness and light. So as soon as we finished here, I got in my car and drove straight to Chicago last Friday because I was in the American Catholic Historical Association meeting in Chicago. And after the meeting was over and I was done with my sessions, I went to the Art Institute. And what did I see right away was I walked up to just some paintings. I always go for the medieval stuff, and there was the beheading of John the Baptist, and I was like,
his head on a platter.
On a platter. I was like, well, it was the whole sequence, actually. There were 4 paintings, and it was the whole sequence of Mark, and I was like, I wonder, would I have noticed this? Would I have gone straight to this if I hadn't just been thinking about it in the morning? So anyway,
and of course, that's the first thing I hear from Karen after we leave is a picture of John the Baptist.
Yeah, a beheaded head. I'm like, look what I'm doing. So, yeah, exactly. So, but we didn't want to go on without finishing chapter 6. And Gary reminded us not last week to please come back because we didn't get to the end of the chapter where we have the walking on the water. So I'm going to read that, and we'll think about this part, and we'll also look at the same story or in Matthew, because it's illustrative. Is this where it is?
Yeah.
Again, we have these particularities in Mark that we don't see even with the same stories. We see different emphases. So that's where we'll start today, at the end of chapter 6, which is on your handout for today under the prayer. Verse 45. Then he made his disciples get into the boat and precede him to the other side toward Bethsaida, while he dismissed the crowd. And when he had taken leave of them, he went off to the mountain to pray. When it was evening, the boat was far out on the sea, and he was alone on shore. Then he saw that they were tossed about while rowing, for the wind was against them. About the fourth watch of the night, he came toward them walking on the sea. He meant to pass by them. But when they saw him walking on the sea, they thought it was a ghost and cried out. They had all seen him and were terrified. But at once he spoke with them. "Take courage, it is I. Do not be afraid." He got into the boat with them, and the wind died down. They were completely astounded. They had not understood the incident of the loaves. On the contrary, their hearts were hardened. So this is one of our favorite stories. Again, we have the stories. We imagine Jesus walking on the water, what it would have been like in the boat to see him. We're all familiar with these stories, but we have a kind of a different version here than we have in Matthew.
Yeah. Did anyone recognize? Is there something part of this story that you're thinking, wait a second, I thought something else happened?
There's something missing here from how you envision it in your mind when you think about it?
Right. That's the best known version of the story that Matthew has. We get Peter going in, and I'll just read that so you can hear that, 14. And that's in Matthew chapter 14. At once Jesus said, "Take courage, it's I. Do not be afraid." Peter replied, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come out to you on the water." He said, "Come." Peter got out of the boat and began to walk on the water toward Jesus. But when he saw how strong the wind was, he became frightened, and beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." Immediately Jesus stretched out his hand and caught him and said to him, "Oh, you of little faith, why did you doubt?" After they got into the boat, the wind died down. Those who were in the boat did him homage, saying, "You are the Son." So that strikes me as that's the story we know best, is this Peter. And as often the case, it's interesting to think about, okay, well, what does this story become if we don't have Peter getting in? If Mark didn't elaborate in that direction as he's telling the story, do we lose interest in the story, or what becomes important about the story?
I'm confused, which is not that. He meant to pass them by.
Right.
Why was he out there if it wasn't to show something to the disciples?
That is not, you're not confused. So the question is, it says here, he meant to pass them by. Jesus is doing something and he's not going, he meant to pass them by, and then suddenly he takes interest. The question is, what was he doing out there? If not going to, show himself to the disciples and help them with their faith and, all of the things that we get from Matthew's story. And I think that is the question. So why don't we think for a little bit about an answer to that question? How does this story change if he's just walking on by? Maybe just out for a stroll. Yeah. No, let's take 30 seconds and talk with each other at our tables and come up with a few ideas. Let's just take a minute to answer that question posed in the back. What do you think he's doing out there? people think?
Just a minute. Yeah.
All right, so what are we thinking here about this? And this is really, we're trying to use our own minds to we don't know the answer necessarily, but we're puzzling over this. Yes.
My thought was, when you read Mark, his last line is, their hearts were hardened. So is that why Jesus was going to pass them by? Because in Matthew, their last line is, truly you are the Son of God. That's contradictory.
Yeah. Yeah. So in Mark, we really do have it, the point being made is that there are two different endings. In Matthew, truly you are the Son of God. And that's why we love this story. There's that movie, The Shack, that came out about 20 years ago, and the guy who's doubting gets on the water and he starts to sink, and Jesus is, pulling him in. We love that story. It helps us with our faith. This story, not so. I don't like it so much. They hardened their hearts. He's passing by. So maybe, are you saying maybe it was sort of a response to their lack of faith?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Interesting.
And then we have another here it is.
Yes.
The question that Mark was a witness to this, whereas Matthew was not, and where was Matthew getting his information that he documented this and included that in his story?
Yeah, so Mark, we don't believe, let me repeat the question. So it's a really interesting question about where is this extra information in Matthew coming from versus what we get in the Gospel of Mark. And I would go back to, I don't think either account by Mark, so far as we know, the Gospeler wasn't himself an eyewitness or one of the early disciples. So Mark is going to be an early convert, whoever that person is. And of course, we've seen that Egypt claims him strongly as the person who brings Christianity there. But both Gospelers are going to be working with these traditions and stories that are previous to them, and to some extent selecting things that fit in with the message that they want. And so it's hard to know, who's dropping something or where some of the other extra details are coming from. That we just don't know. Yeah, Gary.
You just stated Mark was really not a witness to this? I just want
Yes,
to confirm that. Right. By all kind of traditional accounts of who Mark was not a person who was one of the early disciples of Jesus. And so we can't imagine Mark himself as being with this group. He is an early Christian who is compiling a set of stories that are out there about Jesus.
Stories, memories, and so Mark's in a particular community, particular emphases, and he's remembering things, and he's maybe not remembering other things. Doesn't mean those things didn't happen, but it's like if you took all of us 50 years after an event and asked us to recount something important, we wouldn't be necessarily remembering every detail the same.
Yeah.
So, going back to the discussion about him having the angst and other things, it was just making me think. I volunteered for a local music event here in Atherton, and I've been able to work at the stages. When the performers come off the stage, there's a whole different level of energy that they have when they've done something. So in talking about prior to this, he was feeding loaves and had all these people. He probably had an enormous amount of energy that he needed to release as well. And I think showing him walking on the water was just, a point of his ability to be different than everyone else had. Him trying to blow off some steam, he could do different things than us. But I think he was relieving some of that energy.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, and I hold on to that thought because, like, I think that the charisma that Jesus has, and maybe that's what you feel with kind of musicians. I mean, he's before this, the feeding of the 5,000, and that's a huge amount of people out here in this countryside. And then what we'll get right after this is we'll get a few verses just kind of sketching the fact that people are flocking to him and he's doing, his popularity is skyrocketing. So I do think there's this charismatic, this is a show of power to some extent. And yes.
Well, along those lines, you could read that hardened heart a little differently. Maybe the hardened heart was referring to the fact that they weren't convinced by the feeding, and this walking on the water was a further proof of his abilities.
Yeah. So thanks, Gary. I have to remember to repeat things. It's possible that we could understand this as kind of coming out of the feeding of the 5,000 and a sense that people were, the disappointment a little bit that people had still not kind of grasped his power and what his ministry or mission was about. And
the misunderstanding of who he is constant in Mark.
Yeah.
He's
That's something that Mark wants to emphasize.
He really wants to emphasize that. His parents, his family doesn't understand him.
His disciples here.
But in previous stories, the family doesn't get him. The people don't understand. He's surprised by their lack of faith. He is astonished by their lack of faith. We see this over and over. So that's clearly something that is important that Mark wants to emphasize. People didn't understand this, and even after they see our most favorite miracles, their hearts were hardened. So I think what we as Christians want is the story of faith being strengthened, and so it feels to me like there's something missing. Like I probably prefer the story in Matthew. With Peter, I can see myself in Peter with doubting and reaching for Jesus and being strengthened in my faith. I don't really feel that here, and so it's a different story.
Yeah, and let me kind of sketch one possible answer. That language of hardened, where else do we see that in the Bible? Whose heart was hardened?
It's in the Hebrew scripture. It's a really important moment in Exodus.
The Pharaoh.
Pharaoh's heart is hardened against the Israelites. So that's the same word, the same language being echoed here.
And the other thing is another kind of Exodus word is this passing by, is when God appears to Moses on the mountain, he passes by Moses, similar concept and word there. And so I just kind of put out there is maybe it's not Jesus passing by in the sense of I'm going to beat you to the other side and I'm kind of moving past you, but rather a little bit of a show of force. And this is going back to what you were talking about. This we're going to see the transfiguration in a couple chapters, and this is a show of showing and revealing to his disciples his great power before them. And so, again, it's not kind of a race to the other side, but it's a passing by in a kind of visual demonstration of his power. And that is dissettling to the disciples. And then this heart is hard. This emphasis of Mark that they don't quite get it. This is a revelation to them of Jesus' power, but that they don't quite understand.
So are you saying that he's revealing himself in that moment as not just a person, but as God?
Right.
And so he's out there, and he's more than a human being. They can see that he's on the water, and they can see. I mean, clearly, a person walking on the water is not a regular person, but there's something. The divine is revealed in that moment, and. Even though I'm not as drawn personally to this story, I also really appreciate it because how would we react if we were really seeing something that's impossible? There's a terror to it, and we are encountering that over and over in Mark, and we're not used to that. But because we're not afraid, of Jesus. But if we take ourselves back to that moment where this divine is being revealed in real time. It's not always comforting. There's something overwhelming, if not terrifying about it. And so in that moment, maybe God is being revealed, and, it's too much. It's too much.
And also remember, in Matthew, when Peter gets into the water, he does well for a sec, but then he sinks, and to the sense that he didn't have the faith. So there's something disappointing, like there's a little bit of a failure in the Matthew story as well, even though Mark doesn't give us that detail. But it's not all, they give homage, truly you are the Son of God, but there is something disconcerting also in the Matthew, the doubt that's revealed as Peter gets into the water. It's an interesting story. I mean, and I continue, and I hope that's part of one of our themes, is this kind of comparison back and forth on some of these biblical stories brings out the themes that the different writers are trying to get across for their group. And Mark, we've seen Jesus in the boat, stilling the water already, and then here Jesus isn't in the boat, and they're afraid, and they still don't seem to be able to respond to him with faith that he is with them. And this could be a message for this early Markan community. You need to, even if Jesus isn't directly with you and you're in a storm, hold on, and you can have trust in this situation.
Okay. Oh, we have another question? Yeah, another comment.
Is Mark estimated to be older or than Matthew? Or?
Yeah, yes, right. So the question is Mark older than Matthew? And yes, Mark, as we, by consensus, the people who study this, Mark is the oldest of the Gospels, by at least several decades older than Matthew.
Yeah.
Also, you said in the very beginning, Mark is in a hurry.
Yeah, Mark's in a hurry. He's always in a hurry. Immediately, next, immediately after that, yes, there's a pressure. And we can feel here that Jesus, and Martyn, you said this, his popularity is growing. There's a pressure building too, as wherever he goes, there are crowds pressing in on him, and that idea that he needs to let off steam. He's a performer, he's always on stage, people are always demanding something of him, and he feels that as well. I think, we can really enter into some of that with this story.
Yeah.
Well, another take on Peter is, Peter says, I can do that. I can do what Jesus does.
Mm-hmm.
It's a proof that he cannot.
Without Jesus, he's going to sink.
Yeah. And, another piece of Mark is in the other Gospels, Peter, John, you have these personalities in the apostles that step out. In Mark, what we've seen so far, those apostles are named, but Mark is more talking about the disciples as a group. He doesn't, it's rare in Mark for someone like Peter is such a personality for us. He doesn't as often step out as an individual. Mark is more concerned about the disciples, how they operate and think as a group, not letting us see these personalities.
Right. Jesus is 100% the star of the show in Mark. These other personalities haven't developed or aren't the emphasis. Okay, one more comment, and then we'll go on. Yeah.
I'm not sure what gospel, but there's another story where Jesus is in the boat and the storm comes up. Is that?
That's Mark.
That's Mark?
That's Mark. So that's in Mark 2, and I'm glad you mentioned that, or maybe it's Mark 3. No, Mark 4. So, Mark 4:35. On that day, as evening drew on, he said to them, "Let us cross to the other side." Leaving the crowd, they took him with them in the boat, just as he was. The other boats were with him. A violent squall came up. The waves were breaking. Jesus was in the stern, asleep on a cushion. They woke him and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" He woke up, rebuked the wind, and said to the sea, "Quiet, be still." The wind ceased, there was great calm, and he asked them, "Why are you terrified? Do you not yet have faith?" So we have these two storm stories. He's with them in one and sleeping, and they're like, and he rebukes them. He says, "Well, do you not yet have faith?" And here's this other one where they're by themselves, and that's like maybe they would have learned from this lesson that the extent to which God is with them, and Jesus passes by the boat, again in this kind of revelation of himself perhaps, and they still just don't seem to quite get it. Absolutely, I think.
Okay, let's go on. I'll read the next little bit. verses 53 to 56. We won't really pause too much there. And then, Martyn, you'll take over with this sort of next story.
Yes.
I think. So after making the crossing, they came to the land at Gennesaret and tied up there. As they were leaving the boat, people immediately recognized him. They scurried about the surrounding country and began to bring in the sick on mats to wherever they heard he was. Whatever villages or towns or countryside he entered, they laid the sick in the marketplaces and begged him that they might touch only the tassel on his cloak, and as many as touched it were healed. So again, we get this sense that the word has spread about him. Wherever he goes, people are, oh, Jesus is here, bring this person, heal my mother, heal my child, heal me. Just this pressure, and immediately they recognized him. And you get this sense that he doesn't get a break, doesn't get a chance to breathe anymore in this story.
And now we'll start with 7. And this is an important passage. I'll read this down to 16. If in the last chapter we got this scene of kind of darkness and evil with John the Baptist beheaded, now we're going to get Jesus not in conflict with the powers that be, but with the religious establishment, and some distinctions here, and some between this growing for what will become Christianity and the leaders of the Jewish tradition.
Can I just say one thing?
Yes.
So we are very quick to always see the Pharisees as villains. And as we go into a story here about the Pharisees, I just want to put a little context out there. Try to hear this with a fresh voice. Remember that for these people, the only way to be for these Jewish people, the way to keep a good relationship with God was by following God's laws. This is a group of people who have been given laws. And God has said, follow my laws, you are my people, follow my laws, we have a covenant with each other. If you follow the laws, then you will have pleased me and you will be, protected. And if you don't follow the laws, there will be bad things that happen to you. So I'm not trying to say, go Pharisees, but I am trying to say, let's take them seriously with the concerns that they have. That this person is breaking the laws as they understand them. And yes, we see them as, nitpickers. But if everything depended on following these laws, you might be worried too. So don't be so sure that you wouldn't be a Pharisee, and don't be so sure as you listen to this story that the Pharisees are always the villains. They are following their religion as they know it, and the stakes are very high. So as with everything we're trying to do here, hear some of these stories with a fresh ear. Again, I'm not defending the Pharisees, but they have their understanding of their faith, and Jesus is challenging it, and that's serious to them.
I like to keep in mind that there are 2 laws. There's God's laws, and there's the extensions or corollaries that the Pharisees and Sadducees wrote.
Yes. Well, I'll talk about that in just a sec. But that's right. The comment there is that it's important to keep in mind that there are 2 laws. There's the written law that we have in the text, and then there's these oral laws. And I'll move into that. Let's read the passage, then we'll come back around to that. Chapter 7, verse 1. Now when the Pharisees with some scribes who had come from Jerusalem gathered around him, they observed that some of his disciples ate their meals with unclean, that is, unwashed hands. Parenthesis. For the Pharisees, and in fact all Jews, do not eat without carefully washing their hands, keeping the traditions of the elders. And on coming from the marketplace, they do not eat without purifying themselves. And there are many other things that they have traditionally observed, the purification of cups and jugs and kettles and beds. End parentheses. So the Pharisees and scribes questioned him, why do your disciples not follow the tradition of the elders, but instead eat a meal with unclean hands? He responded, well did Isaiah prophesy about you hypocrites. As it is written, this people honors me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrines human precepts. You disregard God's commandment, but cling to human tradition. He went on to say, how well you have set aside the commandment of God in order to uphold your tradition. For Moses said, honor your father and your mother,
and whoever curses father or mother shall die. Yet you say, if a person says to father or mother, any support you might have had from me is korban, meaning dedicated to God, you allow him to do nothing more for his father or mother. You nullify the word of God in favor of your tradition that you have handed on, and you do many such things. He summoned the crowd again and said to them, hear me, all of you, and understand. Nothing that enters one from the outside can defile that person, but the things that come out from within are what defile. Yeah, let's stop there. Jesus is going to elaborate to his disciples, but let's talk about that passage. What is, maybe talk among yourselves, like what is the key conflict that's here between the Pharisees, the religious establishment, and Jesus as you see it from this passage? So take a look at that.
True question. What's the key concept?
Yeah.
I think we would all be upset if someone changed
For the first time, those last few sentences strike me a little different. And that's that we take in truth. And when we pass it on, we're often distorted.
Uh-huh.
I've never seen it that way. All of a sudden, it strikes me.
Yeah, that's interesting. Hold on to that thought.
Jesus, he had to change things. He knew that. It was the time to change it, to become from which is what we do with our 2-year-old, 3-year-old kids. The law is the law, don't explain it by the time they're teenagers. The law is the law. But by the time they're teenagers, you're trying to make them understand and live life a little differently. Upset with what the church was doing. When he said, I might be a Pharisee, I probably would because I like the, just like it was. And then everything was changing. But I just started the first 5 classes. And I just keep saying, that was happening. It upset me a lot. And so I blocked the documents. I thought, well, these are good, these are great, but what's going on at church?
Yeah. Okay, so what thoughts do we have about this passage, this conflict here? You know, how do you see it? How do you understand what the tension is here between the Pharisees and Jesus, between these different understanding of what the message is?
Yes.
I feel like the Pharisees are really trying to follow the law, to the letter of the law, okay? And then, you know, Jesus sees it differently. Yeah, you're following the letter of the law on the outside and trying to make it clean, but you're not clean on the inside or pure on the inside. Maybe, that's my
Yeah. Yes, so the comment, I think there's two things there, is the Pharisees are really trying to do this. I mean, he calls them hypocrites, but
They're sincere.
they're sincere. Yes. And then on the other hand, they are missing the depth or missing the point of those laws, or somehow their focus off. Yes.
Aren't they actually also trying to keep control? I mean, they're up here, everyone else is down here.
Yes.
Stay up there. Anything that's tried to close in on them.
Yeah, there's, I think that's true. I think Jesus, the charisma of Jesus, the miraculous ministry of Jesus will pose a threat to the religious establishment. And this is the religious establishment kind of moving in. We keep getting hints people don't approve, and here is a kind of an even more elaborate version of that.
People don't willingly give up their power, their control, their righteousness that they have, and we can see that today in 100 ways. People who have, power in a system and have authority, I guess is maybe the word, don't like someone who's challenging their authority, and Jesus was doing that.
And the image that we got from Jesus from the very beginning of Mark was the new wineskins, right? You're going to need new skins, new institutional frameworks to contain this new wine. And this is the revenge of the old wineskins to some extent
Yeah.
that we're getting here. Other thoughts about this conflict? Yeah.
From the people's point of view, I see it as, it's consistent with a theory of mine that we as people have a tendency to want things to be simple. They often aren't as simple as we like them to be. So the other thing that happens is we've seen all through one of the reasons about the wanting to have kings. And we'd like to have somebody else tell us rather than think for ourselves whenever we can.
So I think the comment here is that there's a human tendency to want to be told what to do and to know what is exactly required.
Yes, and that makes life simple for me.
Mm-hmm.
But
And Jesus does seem to be...
it's Jesus, and he's trying to expand their horizon, and they don't want to. No, keep it simple, please,
Yeah.
I agree with your theory about people. I think it's, what are the rules? Let me follow those rules, and I don't need to worry about it then, and I can get on with my life. Jesus is making it, on the one hand, he's simplifying it, but in a way that makes it harder, in a way that makes it, more complicated.
He's kind of pointing to the foundation of it all, whereas that's been a loss by a lot of people.
Yeah, good point.
Another kind of a point about Judaism and the way Judaism, there's a variety of Judaisms in Jesus' time, right? And so after the destruction of Jerusalem, Judaism will really, the path of the Pharisees will become much more closely connected to Judaism as a whole, and that's going to be rabbinic Judaism that comes down. But there's a lot of options in Jesus' time. And one of the things that marks the Pharisees is a belief that there are two laws of Moses. There's this written law that we have, and I think this is what was mentioned earlier as well. There's the written law of Moses that we have in the Pentateuch, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. And then there's an oral law that was given at the same time to Moses about how to follow those. And so from generation to generation, this oral law is being followed. And so part of what Jesus is responding is he's trying to kind of pick apart these two different laws. The literal law, which is honor your father and mother, we recognize that from the Ten Commandments. But then these practices and pieces of the oral law that the Pharisees were very intent on understanding as also legitimately going back to Moses. This is this oral law, these practices that we've done for generations. And Jesus is what I would see here is he's kind of suggesting a separation of those things. And he's saying, in fact, sometimes you're so caught up with this oral law, these traditions that you have, that you are able to trespass and break the primary intent of the written law. So, and then he uses this example of Korban. Honor your father and mother. Well, there's this loophole whereby you can claim, I'm giving this to God, and therefore not honor your father and mother. So at least the argument there is Jesus is trying to say, you are so caught up with this external form law, of following the law, how you wash your hands, how you purify, how you do all these things. That's the center. Because of this oral tradition, you've made that really the center of this religious tradition. I'm going to reverse that. And I'm going to say that righteousness and justice isn't a matter of these rules, but is something that comes from inside. That is a just, righteous person. It's from the inside that we judge and think about people, not from how well you kind of connect and follow this oral law.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting that that's really exactly what I'm thinking too, Martyn, that there is a moral law that Jesus is trying to get them to think about, not just the, checking the boxes. And I don't want to get too far afield, but, I was reading just yesterday Martin Luther King's letter from a Birmingham jail in preparation for Martin Luther King Day on Monday, and that's a very, very theologically rich text. If you have the chance to just Google that and pull that up over the next few days, I would recommend it. Martin Luther King Jr. was a theologian. He was a scholar. People sometimes talk about him as a pastor, but he was a theologian. He was thinking about God. And in that letter, as I'm listening to you, Martyn, and reading this, I'm wondering if he was calling on Mark, in that too, because he's telling the people, in Birmingham, yes, I've broken the law, but what's the moral law here? The law has to come from God, and the laws against segregation are unjust. Yes, on the books, I've broken the law, but there's a deeper law. So I think these passages, are so meaningful, and are applicable today in ways that we are not always aware of. So
yeah. One further question is this point about the parentheses.
getting some feedback here.
For the Pharisees, and in fact all Jews do not without carefully washing their hands, keeping the tradition of the elders, and without purifying themselves. We get this kind of parenthetical note in Mark. Any thoughts about what that would say about the community that Mark, this early church community that Mark is writing for?
Can you say that again?
This is in verse 3 and 4. And in fact, all Jews do not eat without carefully washing their hands, keeping the tradition of the elders. And on coming from the marketplace, they do not eat without purifying themselves. And there are many other things that they have traditionally observed, the purification of cups and jugs and kettles and beds.
What's your question?
So the fact that Mark has to put that in parentheses and explain it, what does that perhaps tell us about who he's writing for? Because, for example, Matthew does not do that. Matthew just tells us this. But Mark is going to say, public service announcement. This is something that...
Is he explaining it for the Gentiles?
Yeah, it seems like it's an explanation for people who don't know the customs of the Jews. And so what is...
Well, you guys are going to have to switch. We're getting feedback.
Okay.
Well, I don't know why when you stand over there it does that.
Okay.
My apologies.
It's better when I'm on this side?
I'm sorry. Don't mean to...
Yeah. So he must be explaining it to people who aren't already familiar with it. And they're Gentiles. This is Jews do these things.
Matthew was Jewish.
Yeah, Matthew,
was writing for a Jewish population.
right. And Matthew, if you think about why, there's very little confusion about who Jesus is in Matthew. Because Matthew is a Jew trying to convince other Jews that this is indeed the Messiah. Why would he muck it up by making it difficult to understand? Mark is not. He's we don't really know, but he is clearly got an audience who isn't already familiar with all of these rules and rituals and things, Jewish ways. And so he's explaining them, and there's a lot more confusion in Mark, too.
And that's going to pick up with some of these themes that we have, is in Mark, Jesus often seems to be having his ministry to Gentiles. We've seen him in the Decapolis. We're going to see him there again. The Syrophoenician woman is coming up. So there appears to be an emphasis in Mark on, early on, Jesus is always moving towards Gentiles and his opening the door to Gentiles. And again, that probably reflects the church and the group that Mark is writing for, trying to understand themselves and saying, hey, some of these things go back to, these were already in the ministry of Jesus. Why don't we look at how Jesus expands on this in verse 17 and to 23. When he got home, away from the crowd, his disciples questioned him about the parable. He said to them, "Are even you likewise without understanding? Do you not realize that everything that goes into a person from outside cannot defile, since it enters not the heart, but the stomach, and passes out into the latrine? Thus he declared all foods clean. But what comes out of a person, that is what defiles. From within people, from their hearts, come evil thoughts, unchastity, theft, murder, adultery, greed, malice, deceit, licentiousness, envy, blasphemy, arrogance, folly. All these evils come from within, and they defile." Yeah, I heard.
Pretty good.
I was just going to say, wow.
Yeah, what a list.
And if you were tempted to think about sin and righteousness as being a matter of washing your hands or all these kinds of ritual things, this is a very different kind of basis of thinking about right and wrong.
Well, I like the idea that it's just saying, these are your own choices that result of these evil things. The devil didn't make you do it.
Yes.
And I think we could listen to that today.
Yeah, it's coming from within you, and what comes out of you is the problem. Not, yeah.
Call is coming from inside the house.
Yeah, exactly.
Inside job.
Inside job. Yeah. Yes.
So
The
if you
big.
were practicing Jew and you followed all 612, whatever, but yet you did all these things, were you still considered a righteous Jew?
When you say did all these things, you mean...
All the greed and all the adultery, greed, malice, deceit. I think if you did all those things, but yet followed religiously.
I mean, Jesus is giving us a little bit of a straw man, you could say, I think Judaism is more complex than Jesus is landing on this one particular contrast and conflict between external righteousness and internal expressions of morality. I don't think that Judaism would be, they would have their own, the Pharisees would have their own response to this. I don't think the Pharisees would say, you can be a completely bad person. They would have some kind of a thing that it's in through following tradition, through the kind of submission to that tradition that you're kind of ethically express yourself. So I think the Pharisees wouldn't say, well, we love these things or even allow these things, but Jesus is kind of latching on to a really deep difference in ways of approaching this.
Yeah. So I think your to the question, would the Jews have been okay with all of these terrible behaviors as long as you were following the laws? No. They were following these laws, if you talk to an everyday person, in order to be a good person. They didn't value these sins either. And I like that term, straw man. Jesus is trying to say, he's trying to kind of hold up this idea that you could still be a bad person and do all these things, but in practice probably wouldn't have been accepted. Yeah.
It's interesting again to see the parenthetical expression, likely not from Jesus but from Mark. Thus he declared all foods clean. When do the food laws of Judaism get revoked for Christianity?
Peter,
Right. And what happens? How does that happen?
he had a vision and there was a sheep coming down from heaven.
Right. In Acts, Peter has a vision. There's a sheep coming down from heaven, has all these unclean animals, and Peter says, I would never. And Jesus says, what I have made clean, don't refuse. I have to look at the passage to get the words. But that happens in Acts. There's no reason to think that Jesus in his ministry during his time had opened up the food laws. But this is Mark saying the implication is already there. That Jesus in his teaching and his emphasis on the internal as opposed to the external was already heading toward a position where food laws were going to not make sense anymore. So that's kind of Mark's parenthetical that, hey, I'm living in the new Christian era. We have discounted these Jewish food laws. That was kind of in an early form already in the teachings of Jesus.
When I look at all these terrible things that people can do, I think we could go back to Jewish law and find that they're in conflict with something. But to me, the message is people want to believe what they want to believe, and they will go to any lengths to try and justify it, and they will take those laws and distort them to try and justify what they want to do.
Yeah.
And that's the Korban example, is like, okay, honor your father and mother, but hey, here's this other thing I can do to kind of get my way around.
Yeah, and I like what you said. People will distort the laws in order to get what they wanted in the first place. Ignore the meaning of the law. And again, in Letter from a Birmingham Jail, that's exactly what Martin Luther King is saying. Yes, the letter of the law are these Jim Crow laws of segregation, but I am following something deeper, and that is the moral law of God. So we can learn from I agree, we can learn from these things today. Can I go on with the
Yes,
reading?
let's go on from
Okay. All right, so we're in verse 24. From that place, he went off to the district of Tyre, which is a Gentile area, as Martyn said. He entered a house and wanted no one to know about it, but he could not escape notice. Soon, a woman whose daughter had an unclean spirit heard about him. She came and fell at his feet. The woman was a Greek, a Syrophoenician by birth, and she begged him to drive the demon out of her daughter. He said to her, "Let the children be fed first, for it is not right to take the food of the children and throw it to the dogs." She replied and said to him, "Lord, even the dogs under the table eat the children's scraps." Then he said to her, "For saying this, you may go. The demon has gone out of your daughter." When the woman went home, she found the child lying in bed and the demon gone. Should I finish? Okay. And then he left the district of Tyre and went by way of Sidon to the Sea of Galilee into the district of the Decapolis. And people brought to him a deaf man who had a speech impediment and begged him to lay his hands on him. He took him off by himself away from the crowd. He put his finger into the man's ears and spitting touched his tongue. Then he looked up to heaven and groaned and said to him, "Ephphatha," that is, "be opened." And immediately the man's ears were opened, his speech impediment was removed, and he spoke plainly. He ordered them not to tell anyone, but the more he ordered them not to, the more they proclaimed it. They were exceedingly astonished, and they said, "He has done all things well. He makes the deaf hear and the mute speak." Yeah. All right, so let's go to the Syrophoenician
Yes.
woman. And I heard you say you love this story.
And I think it's interesting to note the different stories of women that really stand out. On the one hand, there's the woman who touches the hem of Jesus, right? We see her kind of...
The hemorrhaging woman.
And she comes forward and has this act of faith that is rewarded. That's one that sticks in our heads. Then there's the scheming daughter of Herodias with John the Baptist there's a kind of negative scheming. But there are these kind of positive scheming women as well who respond to Jesus out of, sneak up behind and touches the hem of his robe, or here kind of have this parley with Jesus that is a smart response and a reward.
Yeah, so we have the agency of women here standing out, women who are going to, in positive ways, get what they need from Jesus. And then we've also got the contrast with Herodias' wife. But what questions do you have, or what do you feel about this incident here with the back and forth between Jesus and the Syrophoenician woman, the Greek?
I like the fact that she doesn't give up. We were told constantly, keep praying and keep asking. And now sometimes I even give God a deadline. But I like the fact that she persists. I think that says what we need to do.
Yeah, the comment is she doesn't give up. She persists. Even if she gets, Jesus gives her a very, a strong rebuke. Let the children be fed first. It's not right to take the food of children and throw it to the dogs. He means her, and she won't.
Right, he's talking about the Jewish people being fed first.
Right.
And that she should be, why should she get something? And she's got a response to that. She says, even the dogs under the table eat the children's scraps. And you can picture his face, like, all right, touche, you know, good point. And for saying this, for pushing back on me, for standing up, for not giving up, you will be rewarded. Your daughter will be healed. So.
And one of the larger points is what we were just talking about, that Jesus, his first and primary mission by the Gospels is to the people of Israel. But Mark wants to show that that's spilling over into Gentiles already, you know, and from the very beginning, Mark is kind of finding places to point out Jesus in a Gentile village, Jesus is here, Jesus is there. And this is clearly a Gentile woman. And Jesus says, well, here, my first mission is to is to the people of Israel. Let the children be fed first. My first call and duty is to Israel. And then he's not insulting her with the dogs, but it's just a figure of speech saying, this is my first mission, and later will come this other mission to the Gentiles. And she's like, well, hey, even when there's going to be spillover, even in that primary mission, and that's what I'm asking for. And Jesus is like, true, and this is for you as well.
Yeah, and I also think, you know, she's doing it for her daughter. She's not going to give up. Her daughter needs help, you know, and we're not going to give up on our we're not going to give up on our kids, right? So, are we out of time?
Well, we're there.
Okay.
Could I ask a question?
First.
What? Yep.
One more time.
I just have a question about why is the word groaned used for when Jesus speaks? I wonder what the significance of that is. Rather than say Jesus said, Jesus groaned. What's the significance of that?
That's in the second one.
Yeah, that's when he's healing the deaf,
Chapter
the man
31.
who's deaf, verse 34.
He looked up to heaven and groaned. No, that's good.
That's fine.
We won't be able to talk. Then he looked up to heaven and groaned and said to him, Ephatha, and then there's also spit involved.
Right.
So this is, of all the places in the Gospels, this has the most connection to kind of expectation, what people would expect of a healer. And I did see some discussion about that groan word, what exactly that would mean. And there's parallels of you know, healing where there's some kind of, you know, there's
Suffering.
well, there's the spit, there's groaning, there's a word, and it's not even, it's a word that is given in Aramaic, so that this Ephatha. So it's emphasizing these traditional aspects of the healing, maybe meeting what people would expect of the way healings would happen. Because Jesus clearly didn't have to spit. But Gary's why.
I just wanted to, I didn't want to cut you off.
Okay.
But I don't know, I'm going to try to get close enough here to fix it up. Just so everybody knows, there's 12 people online this morning, so there's a lot of folks out there that can't make it because of the weather. So thank you very much for being here today. Wonderful presentation.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Apparently, here, I'll give you, Terry, I'm going to give you the mic.
Word has gotten to us that Father Don Zuliger had another stroke, and he's in the hospital. So please keep him in your prayers. I don't know any details.